All right, today I'm going to be going through carburetors on a 1977 Honda Goldwing. This carburetor says obviously off. We've got 4 individual carburetors that are attached in the middle by this air intake system. And I'm actually just going to be going through one carburetor. All carburetors are almost identical. The small differences would simply be how these bowls go on. If you're just being careful how to put those on, which direction, which angle, that is the only difference between them. Jets are the same, settings are the same, floats are the same, needles are the same. You can buy one carb rebuild kit and it would go on any one of these carburetors. So keep that in mind as we're going through there, that this demonstration on this one carburetor is going to be identical on all of them. First thing I'm going to do, even when it's on the motorcycle still, you can do this. Take a screwdriver and you can actually drain the fuel out of the bottom of the carburetor and the bottom bowl even. So you take this flat screwdriver. I like to use a larger screwdriver. If you grab a small screwdriver and stick it in here in your drain bolt here and turn it, a lot of times you're either going to break your screwdriver because sometimes they torque down a little bit too far, or you're going to round off. These are aluminum fittings. Actually, these plugs are actually brass fittings. You put your screwdriver there and turn them. A lot of times you'll damage these. So I like to grab a larger screwdriver with a larger flat on there, put it in there and just unscrew it. Fuel will start to dump out the bottom of that carburetor. You don't actually have to do that before you pull the carburetor. Just kind of saves a little bit of a mess if you've got the bike on the stand. You pull these carburetors, you're trying to finagle them out of there. A lot of times fuel is going to dump out anyways. If you pull them out, pull these bottom caps here, it's just kind of a controlled drain. All right, the carburetor I'm going to go through is right here. No reason that I picked this. Except for I just want to kind of explain a couple different things over on this side. The throttle cables are going to come in here. You got what they call a pull and a push, and when you pull your throttle, it is going to move both of these arms here, which in turn is going to move a butterfly, if you can see it down in there. I will move that. This would be twisting your throttle there, would be opening up these butterflies, allowing more air to flow through there, and pulling more fuel up through those jets. Those jets are a different size. You can replace those. You can adjust those depending on riding condition, altitude, what's done to the motorcycle performance-wise, and that's just something that can be adjusted. You can also get different sizes of needles, and I'll go through those when I'm going through the carburetor here. So this is your throttle side here, where your throttle cables go into. The other thing I want to show you up top here is where your choke cable goes. Your choke cable mounts here. When you push that choke lever up by your handlebars there, it's going to take and grab these arms here, and all of your choke mechanisms are going to engage at the same time. There's a butterfly that runs down here for these carbs, down here for these carbs. It's going to open up. It's hard to see those. If we were to take that throttle, open that up, and then move your choke arm back and forth like this, looking down into your carburetor, you're going to be able to see those butterflies open up. The other thing you can do, if you've got a backfire screen here, or a screen for your intake here, if you pull those, a lot of times you can see that butterfly. What you do want to make sure that when you go to adjust that, or excuse me, when you go to clean that this snaps back properly, no issues, not being held up. And same thing with your throttle cable here. You want to be able to pull on it, and it should open and shut. It is really hard to just pull right here, so I like to just push on these, and it should just snap in back and forth freely. So 2 cables in there, and they both have adjustment on there. So that is how you would adjust those cables if those get some slack in there. Your idle adjust is here, and it is a flat screwdriver. Turning it clockwise is going to turn your idle up. Counterclockwise is going to turn your idle down. What that's doing is running that screw into this plate here, and what that's doing when you turn your idle screw up, or when you turn your idle up, is just opening that butterfly a little bit more. You don't ever want to go and adjust your idle screw 3 turns, 4 turns, 5 turns. You're going to be adjusting it too drastically and you're going to have some issues. So I like to do about a 1/4 turn at a time, possibly a 1/2 turn. You always want to make sure you do that when that bike is completely warmed up into operating temperature. To sync your carburetors, now there's a couple different areas I want to point out to you. All right, for each carburetor, you've got an adjustment to adjust when that butterfly is actually engaging. For this carburetor, you've got the adjustment screw here, and it's got a lock nut on it. So just keep that in mind. For this carburetor, it's here. For this carburetor, it is here. And then this carburetor is where the arm is right there. And so that is how that one is adjusted. And we're going to flip this carburetor over at this time. We're actually going to go through and clean this carburetor here. Like I said, say we've already got the fuel drained out of it. And we grab a Phillips screwdriver and we start pulling these 4 Phillips screws. Too many times, unfortunately, people think they've got to crank down these screws here in order to keep their carburetors from leaking. You've got an O-ring that's going to do that job for you. You do not need to crank these down an incredible amount. Just going to make it difficult for that next person. It's such a small Phillips screwdriver, and these screws just round off so easily, so keep that in mind. Pull these screws here. Set those aside. Once we've got those screws off, set those aside, we can take it and we can pull our bowl off. This is the seal that I talked about there, the O-ring. It's more of a gasket, but it is a rubber. You want to make sure that there's no issues with it there. Make sure there's no cracks. A lot of times because of the heating and the cooling, the fuel, the heat from the engine, the cold from outside. A lot of times these dry rot or cracked. You want to inspect those, make sure they're in good condition. Make sure these ports aren't plugged up at all. Make sure you can see through there. Obviously, these are our screw holes here. Those shouldn't be plugged. And we've got tabs right here, which sit in a certain spot on our carburetor. So not that these have to be in great condition out here a lot of times because those are outside of the carburetor. A lot of times those are showing some wear, but that just kind of shows you where that's supposed to go there. So pull that bowl off. The other thing, you do want to make sure you've got no debris down in here. A lot of times what happens when you've got fuel coming into your carburetors here from this nipple here. Fuel comes in, will go to each carburetor. That fuel will sit inside this bowl here. Any kind of debris coming from your fuel tank or just gummed up from your actual fuel sitting in your carburetors, that debris will sit down here. You give it throttle, more airflow through your carburetor, more fuel is getting sucked up through your jets here. That piece of debris may get sucked up with that fuel, get lodged into your jets there, causing your bike to not run properly. Or worst case would be your bike runs okay, you continue to ride it, that cylinder is going to be starved for fuel, you're going to have a lean cylinder there, you're going to have some motor issues. So it's important that these bowls here remain clean. You can see this is that screw, that drain screw that I had talked about earlier. You want to make sure that that area is cleaned out as well. That's our bowl there. Next we'll go to our jets. This has got a little bit different style than almost every other carburetor that I've gone through. It's got 2 jets right here, and this plate isn't going to be able to come off without pulling those jets. What I do, if I can, grab a pair of pliers, and you can take and you can lift up on those. Unfortunately, as you guys are probably seeing with your jets, they are stuck in there. They've got an O-ring, and they are sometimes a big challenge to pull out of there. So that one came out fairly smoothly. Now we can take and slide that plate off of there, set that aside. Now what you can do, very carefully grab a pair of side dikes there. There's a groove in this jet here. You can take and pull up on there. You can also kind of work it out from there. You want to make sure that you can see through these jets, both of these. Make sure you blow through them with compressed air. Make sure there's nothing that is stuck inside of there. I like to use jet cleaners like this here, and both these orifices on these are big enough to where you can run these cleaners through there. These are ribbed and clean out that jet really well. And then I also last thing that I do is take compressed air, blow it out, just kind of blow all the debris out of those jets, out of the carburetor area, out of your workbench area. I just like to make sure everything's cleaned out and good to go. I don't like blowing through these ports yet, and I'll show you why here in a minute. What I'm going to do next is pull your needle and your needle valve seat there. You've got a pin running through here, and these also can sometimes be a challenge. Now, you want to be really careful when we go to pull this pin here. What happens too many times is these aluminum posts get broke off. If you can see these here, you want to make sure that those don't get damaged. Once those are damaged, those are not a separate part of this carburetor. You can't just go and replace these posts. So you want to be very, very careful that you don't damage those posts there. They are aluminum, so they break easy. I take a pick, and I like to stick something in behind there, and I may have to, if this doesn't come out easy, I'll have to cut the video and go find something to set this post on so that we don't put too much force on here on this pin and push that aluminum and break that post off of there. So if I can't take and tap on it lightly and get a reaction there from that pin, I'd stop and I'll go find something to set underneath of this post in order to pull that so I don't break that off. Very, very bad day if you break those posts off. This one came out fairly easily. Now I grab a pair of pliers or side dikes, depending on how hard it's going to come out of there. I like to grab little needle nose pliers or little pliers, just because at that point you know that you're not going to put too much pressure on there, you're not going to break anything. Take and pull that out. Keep in mind which direction that goes in and out. Sometimes these are tapered. And this just so happens that where I pulled this out with the side dikes beforehand, it is a little bit dinged up. So I'm not going to try to push that dinged up end all the way through. I'm going to start with the clean end, slide it in there. Our dinged up end will be right at the edge of that post there. So set that pin aside. Now we're able to take this float out. We can take our needle out there, and that just slides out of there. And these needles, or these floats, are adjustable. There is this is actually a brass fitting here. Sometimes they're aluminum, and you can push down or up on these to adjust them. What I don't suggest doing is taking a screwdriver and just pushing those up or down without taking any kind of measurements. Check your manual. Leave a comment below if you want these specs, but you want to make sure that this float is set to the correct adjustment. Don't just slam it up and down depending on if you've got fuel dripping out of your carburetor constantly, because what that is doing is potentially not letting enough fuel into your cylinder or into your carburetor, not allowing enough fuel to get to that cylinder. So I don't want you to starve your bike for fuel just because you went and pushed this pin up or down too far. Make sure you make those measurements before you go adjusting that tab there. This needle here has got a rubber tip on it. You want to inspect that, make sure it's in good condition. Also inspect this, make sure you don't have any kind of debris sitting underneath of the needle and in between the needle and the seat here. And that'll cause that float to stick open, fuel to drain in there. Because those cylinders are lower than your carburetors are, it is going to just drain that fuel straight into your motor. Not a good thing. Now, next thing we're going to do is take and we're going to pull this needle valve out. I'm going to show you underneath here, show you how to replace this. If you do have a carburetor that's constantly leaking, maybe all of them are leaking, but typically it'll just be one to start, and then maybe they'll all start leaking at some point. Most of the time it's going to be your needle here. Again, you got that rubber tip on there, they wear out, they get grooved. And when you order a jet kit or a rebuild kit for these carburetors, a lot of times, and make sure that you do, make sure you get the needle valve, the seat area here, and then the actual valve itself. Make sure those parts come with it, because those do wear out over time. You've constantly got this float going up and down, up and down. You've got a rubber tip on here, just like your tires on your motorcycle. This is going to wear out. It's a rubber tip, just like, again. So if you are going to replace those, you take a Phillips screwdriver, take and pull this. This is just a keeper is all it is. Nice to have a little pair of pliers handy to pick up parts like this. Set that aside there. You can take your pliers in, grab a hold very, very carefully, because again, this is brass. If you squeeze too hard, you're going to bend this. If you slip off of there, you're going to damage the top of this. So just be really careful. Grab a hold of the top there, pull up. Underneath of there, you will see an O-ring. You'll see an O-ring here, and you will see a screen. Make sure there's no debris in that screen. If there is, clean it out really good. Carbon choke cleaner and compressed air. You can blow through it. Just be careful if you take if you take compressed air, you don't blow too hard and damage the screen here. Now what you can do, and I only like to do this if all the carburetors are apart, is take compressed air and blow through your fuel inlet here, and that's going to push any kind of debris that's in those fuel lines out of this port here. The reason why I don't like to do it when all the carburetors are still put together is because it could potentially take this needle here that's on your float, blow this needle up, and it could damage this O-ring here that's on this tip. That, or it could really, if you've got way too much compressed air, it'll blow this up and it'll cause this to stick in an awkward position on top of this seat here. And when you go back together, if you don't inspect that carburetor, you'll put it back together, you'll wonder why in the world your fuel is just going everywhere. The other problem is if you have debris in those lines, you take and blow that out, more than likely that debris isn't going to come out of the carburetor that you want it to. This one here, that debris is going to flow everywhere and get jammed up between your needle and your seat here. So that's why I like to have all the carburetors apart before I go and take compressed air and blow through here. Going back together then, what you can do, you can take a little bit of lubricant, and I don't want to take any kind of heavy grease or anything and put it on there just to seal, just to get that to slide down properly. A lot of times, unfortunately, if you're working with these, you've got fuel, carbon choke cleaner, these O-rings dry out. If you're not replacing them, they can get damaged when you're going back together. That's why I'd suggest lubricant. We can take, and what I like to do, once we got lubricant on there, you can take a screwdriver and just push that down. You go and push it all the way down in there till that O-ring is completely seated and seals off that area there. Then you want to take your holder there and your Phillips screw very carefully, because again, these carburetors are aluminum. If you start this screw in the incorrect position, you're going to damage those threads. Now, before we put this back together, I'm going to flip this carburetor over. Oh, I forgot to tell you about that little piece there. But I'll tell you that when we go back together. I'm going to pull this top cap off here. And we've got 2 Phillips screws on either side. Go ahead and remove those. And then you've got this cap here. And sometimes it'll stick. You just take a screwdriver, lightly tap on that, it'll just kind of pop up out of there. Now you've got your top cap here. Clean that out if that needs to be cleaned out. Inspect it really well. You've got your spring, and that spring is going to sit down right like that. So I like to keep those together. You can take your slide here, and your needle will come out with it. There's your slide and your needle there. Take a clean rag. Clean that out if it needs to be cleaned out. This is a little bit discolored, but it's not going to cause any issues. It looks worse than it is. It doesn't stick. It's actually quite clean. You've got a seal here, and then you want to inspect all this, make sure it's clean, make sure there's no debris down in here. When you've got this slide off of here, your needle's right there. Again, I said that this was replaceable. How you do that, you take a flat screwdriver again, stick it all the way down there. There's a flat screw that'll hold that needle in. You take and unscrew that. And then I take and I keep a hold of that needle don't let that fly out. Take that cap, you can tip it upside down, just dump that out. Now that you know where all the parts are, you can take and push that needle up. I will grab needle nose pliers here and grab this needle, pulled up out of there, and there will be a size written on the side of this. And you've got to have really good eyes to read it, or a magnifying glass. So these are replaceable. You can get different sizes. You know what? I'm going to put this back together quick. So slide that needle down in there. Take your cap, slide it down there. And so that we don't forget to do this, I'm going to tighten this cap up. Okay, so your slide is going to go down there, and we're not going back together with it quite yet, so we won't worry about that seal. Okay, so your slide's down in there, just like that. You give it throttle. That's going to open up this butterfly here, allowing more air to flow through there. That's going to, kind of hard to hold that. That's going to lift your slide up there. Your main jet, which is over here, that allows only a certain amount of fuel up through there. Okay, so at this point, your needle is keeping that fuel from flowing into your cylinder, flowing up through your passage there. And the more throttle you give it, the more that's going to allow fuel to come up through there. It doesn't allow more fuel because this jet is regulating how much fuel is actually going up into your carburetor. This is kind of stopping that fuel from actually flowing all the way into your cylinder and causing the bike to go faster. So if you're going wide open throttle, your main jet is completely open, and your main jet holder, what's down inside of the carburetor here, is going to be completely open, and that fuel is going to flow through there as fast as it possibly can. So the idea of a shorter needle, your fuel is actually going to start flowing faster sooner, if that makes sense. So you're giving it throttle, fuel is going to be allowed to come up into that passage sooner because of that shorter needle. Your main jet is still going to stop how much fuel is coming up through there. So your needle is stopping it from going up too soon or too late. Your main jet is constricting it so that there's not too much fuel flowing up through there. If you've got exhaust pipes on your bike, if you've got air filter on your bike, you're going to want to adjust that main jet to a larger orifice so that more fuel will flow through there. That's not going to change when that fuel hits. That's going to be determined by your needle. I hope that makes sense. If you've got questions on that, let me know. It's a little bit hard to explain because there's several different things going on at once, but I just wanted to kind of give you a general idea. Going back together now, take your seal, slide in there. Your slide here is only going to go in one direction. There's a little pin here that's going to keep it from going the other direction. You also want to make sure that your needle is going straight down into that your main jet there, your main jet area there. Okay. Before we slide that down in there, I want to show you something. You take that spring, you set it up in there. There is an incredible seal between here, and you do want that seal to be there. That causes that diaphragm to just pop up just like that. There's some force against it. So you do want to make sure that you've got this area cleaned out, make sure that's in good condition. So you're going to take this slide then, making sure that all these components are in there and installed properly. Slide that needle, that slide down there. Make sure that seals properly. Make sure that spring sits in the right position there. And this, you want to make sure you're going on there straight. You shouldn't have to shove that down. You shouldn't have to force it. I wanted to see if these could go on either direction. And they can, so it really doesn't matter which direction these go on there. Take your Phillips screws in. These are larger than your other ones that go on the bottom bowl there. You can take and snug these up. Again, you don't have to go Hulk mode on these. You can just snug them up. One more thing before we flip that carburetor upside down is your air fuel screw here. And that's on the side of each carburetor. And you grab a flat screwdriver. Okay. Turn. 1.5. And the way that you set these, you'll read in your manual that you want to do 2 turns, maybe it just says 2.5. What that means is 2.5 turns out from the completely seated position. So right now I've completely seated it. It was set at 2 turns out. I'd have to check the manual to see if that's exactly where it needs to be, but it does change depending on riding conditions, altitude, again, performance done to the bike. When you sync your carburetor, sometimes that comes into play. So you want to make sure it's adjusted properly. And so we're going to go 2 turns out like it was. So you take that after completely seated, completely turned in, and you don't have to, again, don't have to go Hulk mode on it. Just seat it and then turn it out. Half turn, 1.5, 2. That's 2 turns out. Each carburetor has those. You want to make sure that those are adjusted properly. To finish putting this bottom back together here, you do have your pilot jet, which is in here. Take a flat screwdriver, pull that out, clean it out, blow through those orifices there. Oh, what I wanted to show you when that top cap was off, which we've already done this, so you want to make sure that you blow through these orifices when that top cap is off, so you don't damage any of the components up top here. You don't blow that needle to a position that it shouldn't be. Blow through those orifices while that top cap is off. Going back together then, I take my float here, take my needle, doesn't matter which direction that sits on there, they're both the same. Slide that onto your tab there, take and set that down in, make sure that's all seated properly like it should. Let's see, this carburetor was set in this direction. So grab our pin, take that pin then. Again, being really careful you don't damage these posts. If you were able to pull it out pretty easily, you should be able to slide it in pretty easily. The other thing you want to be careful of is don't just take and bend these floats. This is, again, brass, and so it damages very, very easily. Now you just take, I use something, anything to push this in. Just kind of saves your finger from getting destroyed. Take and push that in, make sure it goes all the way in, make sure that slides up and down further like it should. We've got a little bushing here that you want to make sure and set down in that orifice there in your carburetor. Each of these carburetors has one. These will actually only go in one direction. They'll only sit on this one direction. So larger one is your main jet there, smaller one and in the smaller slot there. You can take and just set that down on there. You want to inspect the O-rings on there, make sure that they're good. Again, I take a small screwdriver, tap on it. It shouldn't take much. If it takes much, something's not right. Just tap it down just like that. You could actually take and press it down like that. I just tap on it. It's not going to hurt anything. So you be careful you don't take a large screwdriver, tap like that. You're going to damage this this part here. Just tap on the, don't take a screwdriver, tap like that. Plastic end, tap on it. That's all you got to do. Again, inspect this. This little metal piece here will actually sometimes stick onto your bowl here. If that's the case, I like to actually take it off of there, set it down in there. Otherwise, sometimes it can be a little bit hard to finagle that into the right position. As long as that O-ring is good, take and set that down. You don't actually have to tap on that. I don't know why I did that. It served no purpose there. Take your 4 Phillips screws, slide those in, and go ahead and tighten those on there. This is a carburetor on a 1977 Honda Goldwing. If you need parts for this machine, I ended up getting in maybe 6 pallets or so of parts for these older Goldwings. I've got a lot of the 1000s, the 1100s, the 1500s, the 1200s, kind of all years, makes and models, a lot of the 1800 parts. So if you need those parts, make sure and let me know. Check my eBay store for those. I've got a lot of stuff that's not listed, so ask me if you don't see my stuff. If you're wanting more videos on the Honda Goldwing, any year, make, and model, check my channel. I've done quite a few videos on those. And if you've got more that you want me to do, I've got a couple of those bikes I'm going to restore. I can do some of those videos and post those if that would be helpful. So like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.